Hello and welcome to Wisconsin Literacy's winter conference session, preparing students for the new naturalization exam with Lynn Weintraub. We'd like to share a special thank you to our sponsors for their support of this event. Wisconsin Literacy is a nonprofit coalition uniting more than 80 member organizations across the state to strengthen the power of learning in every community. Through collaboration, professional development, health, digital, and workforce literacy programs, and advocacy, we expand opportunities and build a more equitable, literate Wisconsin. Couple housekeeping items. The session today is being recorded and will be available or likely early next week. We'd ask you to please stay muted during the presentation to reduce background noise. Feel free to put your questions in the chat and we'll get to those closer to the end of the presentation. And now I am so pleased to introduce our presenter. Lynn Weintraub is the coordinator of the Jones Library ESL Center in Amherst, Massachusetts, and the author of the New Readers Press textbook series, Citizenship: Passing the Test. She specializes in instruction for beginning level and older English language learners. Please join me in welcoming Lynn Weintraub.
Hello, everybody. It's good to be with you. Let me tell you a little bit more about myself and my program. You're looking at where I work. That's the Jones Library on the lower right-hand corner. And I started this program, would you believe, in 1985. It's 40 years now. It started because the town had just welcomed in a few families of Cambodian refugees. And these were mostly former rice farmers, people who didn't know any English, didn't have very much education, even in their native languages. And we worked really hard to train tutors and place them with people one-to-one and help them with whatever they needed help with in terms of language and understanding the culture and the community. But there was one thing that we had a lot of trouble with. We started to get refugees who were asking for help studying for the citizenship test. And they needed it they needed to become citizens desperately because they had family members in some very dangerous places and they wanted to get them out. And they could do that by becoming a citizen and sponsoring them. But I couldn't find any materials that were at a simple enough level to teach citizenship to these particular students. And so I just developed my own materials and eventually those turned into the books that you see now. And I can tell you that since the time that I started teaching citizenship here, every student has become a citizen. They've all passed the test. So they seem to be working okay. Um, what I'm going to do today is to give you some specifics about the new citizenship test that just was instituted. And then I'm going to share with you a set of strategies I've developed over the years to help students, especially at the beginning levels, understand and remember and produce answers to some more challenging civics questions. So there are three parts to the citizenship test: speaking, literacy, and civics. The speaking test has not changed. This is where the examiner goes over a person's N400 application, updates it, checks to make sure that everything is um, consistent with what's on the application with what the student is saying. And in the process of doing that, they're supposed to figure out whether somebody speaks English with ordinary words and phrases in ordinary usage. That's their standard. So I'm not going to do a commercial for my books, but you can see the red book up in the corner. That book is specifically for that part of the citizenship test. The second part is the literacy test. This is where the examiner asks that student to read a sentence out loud and write a dictated sentence. And it's based on a 90-some word vocabulary that's publicly available. And, to be honest, most students are familiar with that vocabulary and can write and read those sentences. But for the ones who are not, students who are at very low reading levels, you might want to use that blue literacy workbook. It starts from ABC. The third part of the test, the civics test, is where examiners ask questions about history and government. It's all oral, it's not a written test. The applicants have to answer them orally. This is the part of the test that has changed, and it's changed substantially. That's what I'm going to be talking about today. My white civics and literacy book that you see up in the corner there, that has just come out in a new edition, and it covers all content the students need to pass both the literacy and the civics test. And by the way, you see on the lower right-hand corner, uh, Voices of Freedom, the Pearson textbook, that is intended for higher level students, and that is, the author just told me, they're planning to put it out in the next couple of months. So, the civics test, the format of the test has not changed. So it's still an oral open response format. There was talk a couple of years ago about moving to a computer-based written test. That has been tabled, at least for now. The length of the civics test has expanded. So the list of study questions went from 100 to 128, and the examiner will now ask 20 questions instead of 10. So students need to get 12 correct to pass. Once they get 12 right, the civics test ends. In terms of the content, the test still follows the same general topics of history and government, but the geography questions are gone, and that's really sad because those were the easiest ones to teach and the easiest ones for students to deal with. Some questions from the old test have been dropped. Some of them remain the same, and a lot of them have been reworded. And there's a lot of new questions. The conceptual level is higher. Some questions appear to be more appropriate for high school level, maybe even college level tests, but that's what we have to work with. The language level is higher too. It incorporates more complex vocabulary and linguistic structures than before. And in some cases, students have to memorize some rather long phrases to answer a question. So the bottom line is this. Yes, the test has gotten harder. Will students still be able to pass it? I think the good news is that most of them will, but they're going to have to master more content, and it's going to take longer to get through a citizenship course. There will be more instructional hours. The bad news is that those at-risk students, those are the ones that I work with. The students who are at beginning literacy levels that have limited formal education, the older students, and those that are at the beginning stages of English proficiency, they're going to be adversely affected. Not all of them will be able to pass the new tests, but I think some beginners will still have a fair chance if we adjust our teaching strategies to help them. So I'm not giving up on the beginners, and you shouldn't either. But if you really want to be effective under the new circumstances, you're going to have to pull out all the stops and do whatever it takes. So this is fair warning. In this presentation, I'm going to be showing you some strategies that you may never have thought you'd need. As teachers, we want students to understand the history and government concepts, and if they do, it'll make it easier for them to remember the answers. But let's be honest, some students will not understand 100% of what we teach. Some students have always gotten through by memorization. And I think each student is on a continuum between these two possibilities. Every class has some students who lean one way and some who lean the other way. And as the test becomes more difficult, what I'm afraid of is that students will be shifting over to the memorization end of that continuum. But I'm not going to let them fail. My approach is to explain the concepts, but recognize that not every student will understand everything that I teach. And I supplement instruction with extra support for students who rely heavily on memorization. To do that, I'm going to need to bring some new mnemonic strategies in. I'm teaching to both sides of that continuum. fostering comprehension, and boosting memory skills. So let's start with the left side of the continuum, strategies for boosting comprehension. Tip number one, more is not better. Students can only remember so much information at a time, and especially when they're feeling nervous about this test. So it's really important to limit how much content you throw at them. It's good for them to know what a question is about and why that answer is correct, but it's not necessary for them to get a detailed background on the topic. If some students in the class want to know more, there are plenty of resources you can share with them where they can explore this information in depth. But if you do give more information than is actually on the test, just make sure that it's clear what students need to know and what's just interesting information for them. So you see on the right side a pamphlet that they used to give to students when they went for their fingerprinting appointment. I hated this. The reason why, if you look real closely, is because, yeah, they did tell you what the questions and the answers are, but they also followed that with a long paragraph about why the answer is the right answer and some more interesting information about that question. And it looks like it's intended for native speakers, quite frankly. I used to try to get that pamphlet away from students as soon as I could and just give them a simple list of the questions that they need to study. Now, there's a test question that asks people to name five of the original states. And you know that there are 13 possible answers there, right? How many do the students need to learn? Five. They don't need to learn all 13. So I choose the easiest five answers to remember and say, and I'm going to tell you more about that in a minute. But the general idea is just teach the easiest answer and leave it at that. The most effective strategy you can use for supporting comprehension is to make abstract things more concrete by using visuals, like document replicas. I use replicas of the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution, photos and historical illustrations. Students don't actually read that parchment paper, right? But when I'm holding it up and pointing to it and talking about it, it just makes things a little bit less abstract. Students have to learn the names of their governor and the senator and a representative. And when I teach those names, I give them an image of that person. And this makes it more concrete. They may have already seen this person's face in the news. So in that way, I'm building on a little bit of prior knowledge, and that will help to make it more concrete. Um, Maps and globes can provide some more context for what you're teaching, and pictures can help you teach historical events and sort of like plant an image in students' heads. So I'll ask a lot of questions about pictures. My favorite question is, what do you see? And then you can ask, what's happening? Who are these people? Is it happening now or in the past? Or what year do you think this is? Or what will happen next? Or why is it happening? Another important strategy is to support comprehension by drawing connections to students' lives. There's always some way that you can connect it. You might have to really reach to do this. But for example, when you talk about things like the US Capitol, the flag, the form of government, or the leader of the United States, you can start by asking about students' home countries. They probably know this about their own country, and you can attach the information about the United States to what they already know. There's a question in the new set of questions about the US model motto. Do you know it? It's E pluribus unum. I never thought I'd be teaching Latin in an ESL class, but here we are. I have students pull out their own money and look at it. When I ask about national holidays, I'll ask about whether students get a day off that day, whether the kids are at home from school on that particular day, and why. Why are the post offices and banks closed? And if this is something that they're experiencing in their everyday lives, they may be able to tell you a little bit more about what the reason for the holiday is, and that's prior knowledge that you can then start building on. So when I get to topics like religious freedom, colonization, discrimination, World War II, I ask students about their own experiences or their family's experiences with these things here or in their country. They may know a thing or two about these topics already, and I can build onto that and explain how things worked in US history and government. Here's another strategy to support comprehension using stories and examples. For example, there were several test questions that involved the word loyalty, and that's an abstract word. It's kind of hard to explain, so I tell stories. And I might begin with my dog. So I tell about what my dog does that shows she's loyal to me, and then what a dog that's not loyal might do. Then you can tell stories about spouses, actually. A loyal spouse or a spouse is not loyal. And then you can move on to what a loyal citizen is would do or what that person is like and what kind of behavior might not be loyal. And I'm not pulling this just out of nowhere. The examiners actually do ask about this. During the interview, I think when they get to the questions about the oath, they they will ask if there was ever a war between the United States and your country, which side would you support? So you might as well use that when you're thinking of examples to explain what loyalty means. So let's move on to the next thing. Although students will take the citizenship test in English, allowing them to read or hear unfamiliar vocabulary and concepts explained in their own language will save them and you a lot of time. If they already understand the concepts in their home language, then you can put all of your energy into clarifying ideas and practicing the new vocabulary in English. A lot of students are familiar with apps like Google Translate, and I think that allowing them to use these apps in class as you're explaining difficult material is actually to your advantage and their advantage. The same is true for bilingual instruction or the use of bilingual teaching assistants in the classroom. And I print out question and answer lists in students' own language. I recommend the USA Hello website, which you see at the bottom there. They have the questions translated into 18 languages. Now, later, when you get into the practice and review phase, you need to switch to English only mode because at that point they need to get accustomed to performing without translation. There's one thing that you should keep in mind about translation. Not all students are familiar with certain concepts of history and government, even in their own language. So, students who have limited formal education may be confused about terms like constitutional amendment or civil rights movement. And even if you provide translation, they may still not get it. Also, if it's a written translation, remember, just because students speak a language doesn't mean that they can read it well. Unfortunately, unless you can provide some kind of supplemental instruction, these students don't have much choice really but to rely on rote memorization of the answers without fully understanding them. There's a lot to learn about support strategies for supporting comprehension, but here's one last tip. Save yourself some time. If you get a teacher's guide, it'll provide you with strategies for unlocking every concept and vocabulary word that are in the book that you're using. So now I want to talk about the other side of the continuum. How do we make it easier for students to remember the answers? First, we can find ways to reduce the cognitive load by making things short and simple as possible, and by using some clever little tricks that I'm going to show you. We can also take advantage of certain patterns in the questions and answers. And I'm going to show you some mnemonic devices that will be helpful. So let me ask you a question. Is it easier for you to remember the alphabet as a spoken string of letters or as a song? When you learned that song, you were probably 2 or 3 years old, and to you, it was just a bunch of nonsense syllables. You didn't know what those letters meant or what they were for, but you learned them so effectively that they've become firmly stuck in your head. and now you couldn't get them out if you tried. So that's an example of a very effective mnemonic device, specifically musical mnemonics. It leverages rhythm, rhyme, and melody to foster memory retention through repetition and by engaging several of our senses at once. When we sing, we're dual coding. We're processing words both verbally and melodically. We're using separate brain systems, and that makes for richer encoding. When I sing songs to students, I know some of them are going to sing along for the fun of it, and some are just going to look at their feet. And I don't really care. The point is, whether they're singing or just listening, their brains are getting programmed with vocabulary and civics facts. And once they learn that song, they can go home and sing it to themselves. I see it like a piggy bank. Each time they sing or just hear the words, it's making that memory stronger, making it stick a little bit better. And after a while, it becomes a brain worm, one of those songs that they can't get out of their head no matter what they do. The scientific way to say that is each repetition reinforces memory trace, moving it to long-term storage. Now, has anybody on the webinar today ever used songs in a citizenship class? If you have, could you put an example of that song or any song that you've sung with your students in the chat? The songs that I teach recite basic civics facts from the questions, and they use familiar melodies, like nursery rhyme kind of melodies. I'm going to give you three examples. Remember that question about the 13 original states? New York, New Jersey, New Hampshire, New York, New Jersey, New Hampshire, and also North Carolina and South Carolina too. And remember that question about E pluribus unum, the motto of the United States? Um, it means out of many one. It means out of many one. What does E pluribus unum mean? It means out of many one. And finally, there is a question about what form of government does the United States have? The U.S. is a republic. The U.S. is a republic. The U.S. is a republic. It means we don't have a king. I have made 42 audio files that teachers can use as a reference if they want to try this. If you go to joneslibrary.org, look at that uh, red address at the top of your screen, you're going to find recordings of me in my very amateur singing voice, singing songs that go with 128 questions. The words for each song will appear in the new edition of the Teacher's Guide, which I'm working on right now, and it will come out later this spring. Anna, did anybody put any songs in the chat?
I do not see any songs in the chat. However, somebody does thank you. And oh, okay, now some are popping in.
That
One person did say that the new ABC song confuses her. And someone did mention that they use some of the old Schoolhouse Rock songs about
mhm.
U.S. history and government, and that those have been helpful for some students.
Okay, thank you. Well, I do hope that you'll go to the Jones Library website and get a feel for those songs and use them in your classes because I really think they're going to help. I know that my singing voice is pretty ordinary, and probably so is yours, but this is not American Idol. If you can take this leap, if I can take this leap, you can too. And I can already hear some of you saying, but I'm a teacher, I'm not a singer. But take the example of preschool and primary school teachers. The best of them do sing with their students, and they don't worry about whether they have perfect pitch. The students don't care because they don't either. Um, when my students sing along with me, well, frankly, we probably sound awful, and we have a good laugh together, and the coin goes into the piggy bank, all the same. So here are some tips for leading songs. Write the words on cue cards ahead of time, or write them on the board so you can point to each word as you sing it. Take a deep breath and just launch in, sing it slowly, then sing it at a moderate speed. and encourage students to sing along, but be prepared for them to be shy about it. And don't worry about whether the students sing with you or they don't. Just keep on going. Have fun with it. Don't take yourself too seriously. I repeat this song several times and I always review it in the next class. You might want to let students take a picture of the words on the board or copy them in their notebook so they can practice at home. If you want, you can record it and share audio files like I've been doing, or you can give them the link to the ones that I put up on the Jones Library website. So check out this question. What amendment says all persons born or naturalized in the United States are subject to the jurisdiction there of our U.S. citizens? I bet that less than 1 out of 100 Americans could tell you the answer to that. I think that after students hear the first 5 words, they've reached their limit in terms of auditory processing, and they can't even register the rest of that question. So, how can we help students with questions that use extremely complex phrasing like this? My answer is to identify a keyword. What I mean by a keyword is a word or a pair of words that do not appear in any other question. In this question, I use all persons. I teach students that if they hear all persons in the question, the answer is 14th Amendment. If students know this trick, then whether or not they fully understand the question, or even if they're so nervous at their interview that their brain freezes up, as long as they hear that key word, they've got the answer. So the new test is really big on constitutional amendments. Here are some more questions that involve amendments. When there are several answer choices for a question, my prediction is that the number is going to be the easiest one to memorize. Students manage to remember numbers all the time, their phone numbers, zip code, passwords. I think with some practice, they're going to be able to remember numbers for this test. So I'm suggesting that you help students link keywords in the question with numbers in the answer. You explain the Constitution and the specific amendments the best as you can, but then when you do question and answer drills, practice these amendment questions together. I'm also suggesting that teachers keep a chart on the wall to help students remember keywords that they're linking to numbers. Here's a question with some rather complex answer choices. Dwight Eisenhower is famous for many things, name one. And then look at those 4 possible answers. Which one do you think I'm going to teach? If you guessed the number, you're right. I suggest using the number of the president, Eisenhower, as the key word. Using the name of the president, Eisenhower, as the key word, because that's the only question that they ask about him. And then linking it to the order of his presidency, 34th president. I'm also suggesting that you ignore the last 4 words of that answer choice. If I answer that question simply by saying 34th president, you can't really challenge the answer as being incorrect just because I didn't say of the United States. So I just teach 34th president. This strategy will work with 5 of the questions about presidents. So you can post a president's chart on your classroom wall, and students might want to carry a president crypt sheet in their pockets and practice it every day. By the way, the literacy test involves a dictated sentence. Adams was the second president. So you can add that to your president chart if you want. Another strategy I'm using is to cluster together questions that have the same answer. For example, I'm encouraging students to practice these 3 questions together because the answer is pretty much the same. In the case of the second and third questions, I don't think students need to learn the whole phrase to stop the spread of communism. In all fairness, if they say communism or if they say to stop communism, the answer is still factually correct. There are a few other sets of questions that are found in multiple questions, so you can drill these questions as a group together too. What's the answer to that group of purple questions? Did you figure out the president and the group of red questions, the Civil War, and the group of blue questions? The answer is Declaration of Independence. If you want, if you went to secondary school in the United States, you're likely familiar with the names Susan B. Anthony and Harriet Tubman. But for students who are unfamiliar with US history and have never heard any of these names, which answer do you think they're most likely to remember and be able to pronounce? Did anybody guess Lucy Stone? She may be less well known, but Lucy Stone is the answer I'm going to teach beginners. If a student is familiar with one of the other names, they should go ahead and practice the one they know. But if this is new to them, I'll teach the easiest option on the list. And yes, in case you're wondering, there is a song about Lucy Stone. It's in the teacher's guide and it's in the on the Jones Library's audio files. Here are some questions I'm taking liberties with. The first question doesn't say, what was the precipitating event leading to the Great Depression? I mean, look at it. It says when. So if you ask the average American, when did the Great Depression start? And she says 1929. Is that answer correct or incorrect? It's the same if you ask, what is Alexander Hamilton famous for? If I say the Federalist Papers, is that answer correct or incorrect? Here are a few more answers that I'm simplifying for students. So I'm going to just have students say a holiday or a day to remember or to honor soldiers and a day to honor soldiers who died. And in the second question, fought to end discrimination. The answer is still correct. Teachers have been asking me how much leeway examiners will give to students who don't produce the exact phrases as they're written on that official questions list. Well, keep in mind, there are well-educated native English speakers who take this test too, and a lot of them never even look at the official question list. And they're going to fail if they answer a question that's factually correct but phrased differently than the one on the official list. I think it's unlikely. I can't be sure that examiners will follow their own policy, but this is what it says. An alien, they mean an applicant. They changed that language recently. An alien passes the civics test if he or she provides a correct answer or provides an alternate phrasing of the correct answer. So hopefully they follow their own policy manual. Now, as I've mentioned, the 2025 test presents some big challenges to students in terms of vocabulary that's difficult to say and remember. So I'm offering you 8 tricks for helping students to master them. I'm guessing that some of you are already using some of these strategies. You can use them all, or you can just use the one that you need. So I'm going to demonstrate the 8 tricks using the word representation. This is from the question, why does each state have 2 senators? And the answer is equal representation. So the first thing is to write the individual syllables up on the board and mark up any silent letters or letters that are pronounced differently than one might expect. And by the way, if you need a phonetic spelling of the word, you can find it in the Say It feature of the Civics and Literacy book on each page. Second, model it. Say the target word slowly and clearly several times. Enunciate each individual syllable as you point to it and have students repeat. And take note of any difficulty they seem to be having in producing specific sounds. Then exaggerate those sounds that students are having trouble with. Stretch out the particular phoneme and say it louder. And if possible, explain to students what they need to be doing with their tongue or their lips or their throat in order to produce the target sound more accurately. If you hear errors in syllable stress, Underline the accented syllable, and as you model the word again, emphasize that syllable by raising your voice or pounding the table or stomping your foot, and have students do the same thing as they repeat the word. I have a class of older beginners, and they think it's hysterical when I emphasize the accented syllable by stomping my foot. They all get up and stomp their feet too. It's kind of fun. Um, the next thing you could do is a backward buildup. I'm going to have Kimberly unmute and demonstrate with me. This is where you have students repeat as you call out the syllables very clearly in reverse order from the back to the front. So you ready, Kimberly?
I'm ready.
Okay. Shun,
Shun,
tation,
tation,
zentation,
zentation,
resentation,
resentation,
representation.
representation.
Okay, thank you. That was a backward buildup. ESL teachers have been using this technique for years, and the reason why is because it works. I can't really tell you why it works, but it works. Um, Another thing that I do is I hold up my hand and I count out each syllable on my fingers. Representation. And I have students do the same thing, and that really does help them make sure that they fit each syllable in. Another thing you can do is to lead a call and response sequence in various ways. So you can whisper the word and have students whisper it back, and then you shout it and have students shout it back, and clap your hands with each syllable and have students do that. Then pound their desks, then stomp your feet, and pump your fists in the air. And then if you want to have a little more fun, you can follow this exercise by calling on individuals to say the word in whichever way they want. So by adding a physical element to the exercise, you can enhance memory. We're using kinesthetic learning here, and the scientific way to say that is physical activity creates stronger neural connections to boost retention. And finally, assess whether students can say the word accurately. Call on each student individually to produce the word and give the thumbs up or a compliment for accurate pronunciation. If a student's unable to produce the word accurately, model it again, give them some quick coaching, and give the student a chance to say the word again. If the student's not doing it correctly, don't belabor the point, just offer a neutral okay and move to the next student. So some of the answers on the 2025 test require students to produce complex phrases. I think that producing these answers is going to be the biggest challenge for students with the new test. I can only shorten them so much, and that leaves me with two options. One is to consider them throwaway questions, so students can get 8 wrong and still pass the test. I can focus on the questions that students can reasonably get right, and for the really tough questions, students can say, I don't know. Let me try the next question. Or I have a plan B. I can teach the tricky phrases as a chant. So, the next slide here. Whoops.
I think we might be one ahead.
Oh, that's the problem.
There we
Okay.
go. Thank you.
Okay. So here's one of the more difficult phrases students have to produce. I will have them chant to closely follow public opinion, to closely follow public opinion. The second one, it's really, isn't that too much? Powers not given to the federal government belong to the state or to the people. When I saw that question, I wondered, what are these people thinking? But I can teach this as a chant. I really can. Powers not given to the federal government belong to the states or to the people. And you can keep the rhythm if you need to. Powers not given to the federal government belong to the states or the people. And the last one, they helped people understand the U.S. Constitution. They helped people understand the U.S. Constitution. Chanting is a really effective mnemonic device, specifically rhythmic and auditory mnemonics. Chanting can enhance retention through predictable, repetitive, multisensory patterns, and it can help students to master syllable stress and intonation. I have recorded audio files of the 16 chants you can listen to as a reference. They're also at the Jones Library website, which you can see the address for in red up at the top of the screen. After you have taught the civics fact that's involved in this question, here are the steps for leading a chant. First, if you haven't done it already, I suggest going over the pronunciation of the more challenging multisyllable words using those 8 tricks that I just described. Then I demonstrate the chant slowly, clapping out the beat as I speak or pounding on the table. I encourage students to chant along as I increase to a moderate pace, and I keep repeating it on a loop many times. You may want to teach this as a listening only activity, but if you decide to provide written text for students to follow, do it a couple of times and then cover or erase that text. So the students will get practice reciting the chant from memory. And then after repeating the chant many times, I will call on individual students and see if they can answer the corresponding test questions in a normal voice, not as a chant, but see if they can remember how to say that difficult phrase. So that's mostly it for today, but before I take your questions, I want to leave you with some resource suggestions. Citizenshipnews.us is my blog for citizenship educators, and I post new developments whenever I think they might be useful for teachers to know about. So, for example, changes in the test, in the application process, and resources that might be useful to you. And you can sign up at Citizenship News to get new posts automatically sent to your email. I only post maybe once or twice a month for the most part, so you're not going to be getting a lot of mail. The second resource is Echo Citizenship. This is a free online professional development session. It's monthly. It's just for citizenship educators. Each month, there's a 1 hour session with short peer-led presentations on various topics, followed by peer-initiated case study discussions. And they're recorded, so if you can't join us on uh, this, I think it's, yeah, the second Wednesday in the middle of the day, you can listen to the recordings. It's one of the ways that citizenship educators across the country can network and share ideas and challenges and get some encouragement from one another. So I am done with what I have to say, and I would be happy to take some questions at this point.
So I'm looking through the chat. So please feel free. You can raise your hand or put your comments in the chat for Lynn. I do want to mention that Melinda did put in a link to a YouTube video to answer your question about songs. And it looks like I wasn't able to watch the video, but it goes to a cartoon called The Animaniacs, and that they have a sing along. And it looked like a variety of songs showed up in my YouTube feed then that's tied to that. So, yes, I'm sure there's all kinds of resources you can find out on YouTube for songs. But I do look forward to looking at that Jones Library, Lynn, and hearing your voice. I'm sure those are great resources for us too. The first question I see here is how many hours of instruction excuse me, how many hours of instruction over how many sessions is your average citizenship class?
That's a really good question, and I don't know the answer yet because um, a lot of teachers are still teaching the old set of questions because students who applied before November 20th, I think it is, are still being tested on the old set. In the past, about 20 hours used to do it. I think now we may be going up to 30 or so. But I will know a little bit better when more of us are teaching the new questions.
Thank you. And the next question we have you heard more about the changes to the literacy test portion? I attended an interview in January on the day the officers received the new directive. The sentences are longer and more complex, and words not on the posted word list have been added, like George and federal.
That's not actually the case. I don't know who it was that was speaking about that, but
It was
you
me.
can't you can't just change the test and not announce the changes, have a public comment period, put them in the Federal Register, make
Mhm.
any changes you need to, and then implement them. So maybe somebody was talking about what they wanted to do.
No,
Um, a
can
rogue officer.
I'm an accredited representative with the Department of Justice. My name is Michelle Martin. I was attending the interview, and the officer specifically told me the reason they didn't change it is because they're using the same words, they said. But since then, I've heard that they're using other words that are not on the list. She said the reason there's no directive except what they received that morning was because they were still using the same list of words. They were just changing them around and making the sentences longer, more complex. However, since then, I've heard other things,
They
other words.
have to use the words that are on the official list.
Well, what they have to do and what they're doing these days,
That's a question. And
yeah,
it could be that one particular field office is sort of going rogue, but that can be challenged. The legal immigrant rights groups want to hear about instances where the officers are not following the official policy and it should be reported.
if you go on YouTube and you look at some of the bigger YouTube uh, platforms that do this, that teach these lessons, they have also started teaching longer, more complex sentences using 30 or so extra words that were not on those lists. So that's an interesting thing for us, the people who teach the class, and for me, who goes into the interviews with the students that I've applied for. And yeah, it's a change.
Wow. I think it may be specific to your field office. We're not hearing anything about that in Massachusetts, and the legal rights groups that I talk to around the country have not brought that up. But I'm going to start asking some questions and find
Yeah,
out
it
what's
might
going on
be,
here.
yeah, under the radar. The woman told me that she didn't know anything about it until she got there that morning. And she's a more veteran officer, so she hasn't been removed like many of them have. And she said that she figured the reason it didn't come out as like a big announcement, like the 128 questions, was because, according to her, at that time it was the same words. So
So
that was
I could understand if they use this, the question, sorry, the vocabulary that's on the official vocabulary list. There's about 90 of them. And maybe there are some ways of making longer, more difficult sentences out of those specific words. If they're adding new words to it,
yeah.
they're not following their own policy and it's illegal.
So it'll be interesting to find out when somebody is, confronted with that, with
Yeah,
someone present, because a lot of times the students will go in and they don't have anybody with them
right.
to challenge it. I was there that day. There were no real new words, except they did have her write George, which is not on the writing list. And luckily she could spell it. But since then, more information through YouTube and through other places I've been hearing. So that's something
Well,
we're,
thanks for bringing that up. I'm going to take it up with my legal contacts and see what they have to say. But I think we have to move back to the civics test. Does anybody have any questions about that?
Yes, and thank you, Michelle, for sharing your experiences. Um, we have a question. Is there a fourth part of the test, vocabulary, as part of the application review? Questions such as, tell me what weapons means.
Questions such as what?
Tell me what weapon means.
Oh, I see what they're talking about. So during the personal background interview, sometimes an examiner will ask a question, the student just sort of quickly answers no, and the examiner is thinking, I bet you didn't really understand this question. So what does this particular word mean? Um, like weapon. And then that puts the student on the spot because they have to come up with a definition. They might know what that word means even in their native language, but they can't think of a word to explain it. So that does happen. And we do try to make sure that students understand some of the difficult vocabulary and have synonyms or examples that they can use. But that is an interview question. And I did write a book about interviews and I could do a presentation about interviews, but I'd like to get back to the civics test now.
The next question is says, thank you for a very informative talk. My question is about the loyalty question.
Mhm.
This is a very tricky thing. What do you think the appropriate answer to say they would? So what do you think the appropriate answer is if they would stand with the USA or with their mother country if a war breaks out between the two?
If the student answers, I would support my native country, they can't become a citizen because the examiner considers this a test of whether or not they're truthfully taking the oath, that they're promising that they will support the United States and the United States only. That's actually what the oath says.
Okay. And then another comment regarding, I believe this is for the Milwaukee field office, that during the good moral character portion of the interview, yes, no questions, they are going back to asking those vocabulary questions that
Yeah.
previously they weren't supposed to ask.
And it's true, in the policy manual, it says that they're not supposed to ask for definitions of words, but they've kept doing it all along, and that's why we teach synonyms. However, you need to invite me back to talk about the interview. Does anybody have questions about the civics test?
I just have two more questions. One person says I've used flashcards with a questions on one side and answers on the other, and then review them each session and ask questions
Mhm.
as we go, and that this has been very helpful with working with one student at a time. Um, and then another comment, we instruct individuals to study words in the question so that they can explain what a word means. The question is a yes/no answer, but they need to understand what's being asked just in case. And I don't see any other questions at this time.
Does anybody have any suggestions for how to get um, difficult concepts across or how to help students remember anything?
Practice makes perfect, I see. There is a question. Is there a website with the new civics questions and acceptable answers?
Yeah, it's posted on the USCIS website. You can just Google 128 questions if you want, and you'll see it.
Okay, well, I'll start wrapping us up. Oh, now I see Joyce has her hand up. Joyce, would you like to raise your question? And you are still on mute.
I was just going to comment that when I was teaching in schools, and schools are beginning to have to graduate from school, from high school, students need to pass the civics test part of the naturalization test. What I did is I used a format of Jeopardy, where we had the game board Jeopardy in front of us, and then we did the answering of the questions, and then they'd have to come up with the question. So that was just something that we had done too.
That's great. Thank
Okay.
you. All right. Well, thank you all for attending our session, preparing students for the new naturalization exam. Thank you so much, Lynn, for all the tips and tricks and resources that you shared.